The rain was falling the way it only falls on nights when the world feels heavier than usual. Cold, relentless, like it wasn't just washing the streets, but scrubbing old memories back to the surface. The Millionaire's black luxury car slowed near a traffic signal in downtown Chicago. Inside, the leather seats were warm, the windows fogged slightly, and the silence was broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Alexander Rothschild stared straight ahead. 62 years old, billion-dollar empire, 3 companies, 2 divorces, and a heart that had learned how to beat without feeling. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Outside, people rushed past with umbrellas, coats pulled tight, eyes fixed on their own destinations. And then, at the corner of the intersection, Alexander saw him. A boy, barefoot, soaked, standing beside a broken streetlight, holding a cardboard sign with shaking hands. The boy couldn't have been more than 17. Skin pale from hunger, hair matted from weeks, maybe months, without proper care. His clothes hung on his thin frame like borrowed fabric from another life. Alexander's driver slowed even more. "Should I go around him, sir?" the driver asked, already uncomfortable. Alexander didn't answer, because something about the boy made his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. The boy lifted his head, and their eyes met. In that instant, Alexander's breath caught. Not because of pity, not because of guilt, but because, those eyes. He had seen those eyes before. 30 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and fear. In the face of a child he believed he had buried. The traffic light turned red. The car stopped. The boy stepped closer. Rain streamed down his face as he looked directly at Alexander through the tinted window. And then, he smiled. A small, broken smile. The boy leaned forward, placed his hand gently against the glass, and spoke. His voice was barely louder than the rain. But Alexander heard every word. "Dad, it's me. I'm alive." The world stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Alexander felt his heart slam against his ribs so hard it hurt. "No," he whispered. The driver turned around, confused. "Sir." Alexander didn't hear him. He was staring at the boy. At the scar above his left eyebrow. At the curve of his lips. At the way his left hand trembled slightly, the same way Alexander's did when he was nervous. Memories exploded in his mind. A woman screaming. A hospital corridor. A doctor shaking his head. A tiny body wrapped in white. A funeral he never attended because he couldn't face it. Alexander's voice shook. "That's impossible." The boy swallowed. Rain mixed with tears. "I know you think I died," the boy said softly. "Everyone told you that, but I didn't." The driver opened his door. "Sir, should I?" "Don't," Alexander snapped. The driver froze. Alexander slowly opened his window. Cold rain blew inside instantly. "What is your name?" Alexander asked, his voice barely holding together. The boy smiled again. "You named me," he said. "Ethan." The name hit him like a bullet. Alexander's hands began to shake violently. "No, my son Ethan died in a fire," he said. "I saw the reports. I saw the photos. You saw what they wanted you to see," the boy replied. "Because it was easier than the truth." The traffic light turned green. Cars honked. The world demanded movement. Alexander didn't move. "Get in the car," he said suddenly. The driver's eyes widened. "Sir." "Now." The boy hesitated. "I don't want your money," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know." Alexander leaned forward, eyes burning. "Get in the car." Slowly, carefully, the boy opened the back door and climbed inside. The door closed, and just like that, a ghost from the past was sitting 3 feet away from a man who had spent 30 years mourning him. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain pounded the roof. Alexander finally whispered, "Tell me everything." 30 years earlier, Alexander Rothschild was not always a millionaire. Once, he was just a young engineer with tired eyes and big dreams. He met Laura in a bookstore. She was reading a novel he pretended to recognize. They talked for hours. They fell in love too fast. And when she became pregnant, Alexander was terrified, but happy. Ethan was born during a winter storm. Alexander held him with shaking hands, whispering promises he didn't yet know how to keep. But life changed. Alexander's company started to grow. Travel increased. Arguments followed. Laura accused him of choosing money over family. Alexander accused her of not understanding sacrifice. The night everything ended, Alexander was on a business trip. A fire broke out in their apartment building. By the time he arrived, the building was ash. Laura survived, with severe burns. Ethan, Did not, or so he was told. Laura never spoke again after that. She was placed in long-term care. Alexander buried his grief in work. He built an empire on guilt. And never loved again. Back in the car. So you just lived on the streets? Alexander asked, his voice hoarse. The boy, Ethan, shook his head. No, not at first. He stared out the window. A man took me from the hospital, he said quietly. Said he was helping. Said my mother wanted me safe. Alexander's blood ran cold. A man, yes. He worked for the building owner. He forged papers. Sold me. Alexander felt sick. I grew up in foster homes, Ethan continued. Some were okay. Most weren't. When I turned 16, I ran. Alexander's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you look for me? He asked. Ethan turned toward him. I did, he said. But when I finally found your name, saw who you became. He laughed bitterly. I didn't think you'd believe a homeless kid. Alexander covered his face with his hands. 30 years. 30 years stolen. The car pulled into Alexander's mansion. The gates opened silently. Ethan stared. This is your house? He asked. Alexander nodded. And you were sleeping under bridges, he whispered. Ethan shrugged. Life. Inside, the warmth felt unreal. A maid gasped when she saw Ethan. Alexander raised his hand. Prepare a room, food, clothes. That night, Alexander didn't sleep. He sat outside Ethan's room, listening to him breathe. Alive, real. At dawn, his phone rang. A private number. Mr. Rothschild, a man's voice said. It's been a long time. Alexander felt ice crawl up his spine. Who is this? The man chuckled. You're about to reopen a very expensive past. The line went dead. Alexander knew then, Ethan's survival was not an accident. And someone would do anything to keep the truth buried. Alexander Rothschild did not answer the phone when it rang again. He already knew. Some ghosts don't knock twice. He stood by the tall window of his study, staring at the city lights far below. Somewhere in the guest room upstairs, Ethan was sleeping, fed, warm, alive. A miracle Alexander was still afraid to touch, as if it might disappear the moment he believed in it fully. The phone vibrated again. This time, Alexander answered. Speak, he said coldly. The man on the other end laughed softly. You always did hate small talk, Alex. Who are you? Alexander asked, though his mind was already racing through old names, old deals, old sins. You don't recognize my voice. A pause. It's Victor Hale. Alexander's blood ran cold. Victor Hale, his first major investor. The man who had saved his company, and owned his soul in the early years. What do you want? Alexander asked. Victor sighed theatrically. You let a boy into your house tonight. A boy who should have stayed forgotten. Alexander's hand tightened around the phone. You took my son. I saved him, Victor replied calmly. From a woman who would have ruined him. From a man too weak to protect his family. Alexander felt something inside him crack. You set the fire, he whispered. Silence. Then, I ordered it, Victor said. Yes. Alexander closed his eyes. 30 years of guilt, suddenly redirected. You burned my life down, Alexander said, his voice trembling. And you built your fortune on my ashes. You built yours too, Victor replied. Don't pretend innocence. Alexander hung up. Then he did something he hadn't done in decades. He cried, not quietly, not politely, but like a father who had just learned his child didn't die, he was stolen. Ethan wakes. Ethan stood in the doorway. He had heard everything. I knew it wasn't an accident, Ethan said softly. Alexander turned, shame flooding his face. I'm so sorry. Ethan shook his head. I didn't come here for apologies. Alexander looked at him. Then why? Ethan swallowed. I came to know if you'd choose me now, even if it costs you everything. Alexander didn't hesitate. Yes, the past comes knocking. Victor Hale didn't threaten again. He didn't need to. The next morning, Alexander's companies were attacked. Lawsuits, frozen accounts, media leaks. Headlines exploded. Billionaire linked to illegal adoptions. Rothschild empire built on corruption. Alexander knew Victor's playbook. Destroy the man, erase the boy. But this time, Alexander fought back. He opened everything. Every contract, every deal, every secret. He turned himself in. The board begged him not to. You'll lose everything, they warned. Alexander nodded. I already did. 30 years ago. Courtroom. The courtroom was silent as Ethan took the stand. He wore a borrowed suit. His hands shook, but his voice didn't. They burned my home, Ethan said. They told my father I was dead. They sold me like property. Victor Hale watched from his seat, expression calm. Until Ethan looked directly at Alexander. And this man, Ethan continued, was lied to. He mourned a child he never buried. Alexander couldn't breathe. The judge leaned forward. Victor's lawyer stood. Objection. Denied, the judge said sharply. And then Victor Hale stood. He smiled. You want the truth, Victor said loudly. Fine. The courtroom froze. I needed leverage, Victor admitted. Alexander was brilliant, but weak. Family made him predictable, so I removed it. Gasps filled the room. I didn't expect the boy to survive, Victor added. But when he did, I used him. Silence. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. Victor Hale was arrested that day. For arson, human trafficking, murder conspiracy. The empire he built collapsed in hours. After everything, Alexander lost his fortune, most of it, anyway. But when he walked out of court, Ethan was waiting. Ready? Ethan asked. Alexander smiled. For what? For life, Ethan replied. They didn't return to the mansion. Alexander sold it. They bought a small house near the river. Alexander volunteered. Ethan studied. Some nights, they sat in silence. Healing isn't loud. One evening, Ethan asked quietly, do you regret losing everything? Alexander looked at his son. I lost nothing, he said. I found you. Ethan nodded. Then, for the first time in 30 years, Alexander slept without nightmares. Epilogue. Years later, a journalist asked Alexander Rothschild, now a quiet man with simple clothes. What's the greatest lesson of your life? Alexander smiled gently. That the world can take everything from you, he said. But truth always finds its way home. And somewhere nearby, a once homeless boy, now a man, called out. Dad. Alexander turned and smiled. Fame doesn't disappear quietly, even after the verdict, even after the headlines faded, even after the money vanished. Alexander Rothschild learned that the hard way. People still stared, some with curiosity, some with judgment, some with pity. Once, those looks would have crushed him. Now, they barely touched him. Because every morning, when he opened his eyes, the first thing he heard was movement in the house. A kettle boiling, footsteps on wooden floors, a voice calling out, Dad, you want your coffee? That single word, Dad, did more for him than any empire ever had. Learning each other, Alexander had missed everything. First words, first steps, first scraped knees, first school days. He couldn't get them back. And that hurt more than prison ever could have. So he did the only thing left. He showed up. When Ethan studied late, Alexander stayed awake too, pretending to read, just to be there. When Ethan struggled with anger, Alexander listened instead of fixing. When Ethan asked painful questions, Alexander answered honestly, even when the truth made him look weak. One night, Ethan finally asked the question that had been waiting between them like an unspoken shadow. Why didn't you fight harder back then? Ethan asked quietly. Alexander didn't defend himself. I was afraid, he said. Afraid of losing my work. Afraid of failing. Afraid of being nothing. Ethan nodded slowly. I was afraid too, he said. Every day. That was the moment they truly became father and son. Not through blood, but through truth. The letter. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Alexander opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. You destroyed everything I built. But I underestimated one thing. Love. Victor Hale. Alexander folded the letter and placed it in the fire. Some things didn't deserve answers. A choice. Ethan received an offer. A university scholarship, full ride. Journalists wanted interviews. Publishers wanted a book. Producers wanted a movie. Ethan turned most of it down. I don't want to be famous for surviving, he said. I want to be known for living. Alexander smiled. They moved again. Not far, just enough to disappear. Alexander began working at a shelter. No cameras, no speeches, just quiet service. One night, a boy about Ethan's age walked in, thin, scared, angry at the world. Alexander sat beside him. Hungry? He asked. The boy nodded. Alexander handed him a bowl of soup. And Ethan watched from across the room, understanding something deeply. Pain didn't end with justice. It ended with compassion. Years later, Alexander's hair turned white, his hands slowed, but his heart felt younger than ever. Ethan graduated. He didn't give a big speech. He simply hugged his father and whispered, "You didn't save me." Alexander frowned. "What do you mean? You came back for me," Ethan said. "That's different." The last scene. On Alexander's last birthday, they sat by the river. The same river they passed every day. Do you think Mom would forgive us? Ethan asked softly. Alexander looked at the water. I think, he said, she always wanted us to find each other. Ethan nodded. The sun dipped low. Silence settled comfortably between them. Not empty. Complete. Final words. Alexander Rothschild died a poor man. No empire. No fortune. But at his funeral, the room was full. Not of investors. Of people. People he had helped. People Ethan had helped. People whose lives were touched quietly, without headlines. Ethan stood at the front. He didn't cry. He smiled. My father lost everything, Ethan said. And in doing so, he finally became rich.